Malt Whiskey. North America, South America. Moonshine Life Recipes. By J.B. Wagonmaker. Simple malt Scotch recipes. Always carry a bottle of whiskey with you if the snake bites you. Also, always carry a small snake with you. W.K. Fields. Originally from Scotland, but now produced all over the world, single malt whiskey opens up an unlimited world of possibilities before the distiller. The only rule: use 100% malted barley and nothing else. You can use smoked malt for a drink in the style of Islay. Scottish whiskey from the island and the mountains has a characteristic smoked taste, because the malt is smoked with direct flue gases, or opt for less smoked malt and drink a typical soda. Scotland and largely Ireland. You can try single malt whiskey all your life and lightly scratch the surface of this category of drink. There are two main styles of single malt whiskey: smoked and non-smoked, but not even smoked Scotch is still cloudy. You can buy smoked malt at several beer stores. To understand the level of smoked malt, pay attention to its description. It must contain the abbreviation ppm, parts per million, which indicates the phenol content in the malt. The phenols are contained in peat smoke. Today, the producer is divided into smoked malt: low peat 1-5 ppm, medium peat 5-15 ppm, and high peat 1550 plus ppm. To start, I want to offer the simplest and most basic recipe for lightly smoked malt whiskey. North America, South America. The ingredients. Basic recipe for smoked malt whiskey: 7.6 liters water, 1.35 kilogram barley malt, 0.1 kilograms smoked barley ppm 40, 100 gr pressed yeast, 2 teaspoons sourdough for yogurt or cheese. Basic recipe for smoked malt whiskey: 7.6 liters water, 1.35 kilogram barley malt ppm 20 to 40, 100 gr pressed yeast, 2 teaspoons sourdough for yogurt or cheese. Irish malt whiskey with single malt: 7.6 liters water, 1.4 kilograms crushed barley malt, 1.4 kilograms crushed green barley grain, 1 sachet. Brewer's yeast. For brewer's yeast or lager beer makes the drink smoother, which is typical for Irish whiskey. 2 teaspoons sourdough for yogurt or cheese. American rye whiskey: 7.6 liters water, 1.8 kilograms unmalted rye, 0.45 kilogram malted rye, 0.45 kilogram barley malt, 1 teaspoon enzyme amylase, 100 gr pressed yeast, 4 tablespoons sourdough for yogurt or cheese. Instructions. Basic recipe for smoked malt whiskey: heat 1/4 of the water to 71 degrees Celsius and pour malt into it. Keeping a temperature of 66 to 68 degrees, take a break for 1 hour and 30 minutes. Strain the wort, wash the pellet twice. The first time with 1/4 of water at a temperature of 73 to 74 C, the second time with 1/4 of water at a temperature of 82 to 83 C. Combine the 3 plums, add the last 1/4 of water, throw away the pellet. Cool the wort to 33 degrees Celsius, transfer to a fermentation tank and add pre-prepared yeast and yeast for fermentation with lactic acid. Read the second part of the article with a detailed description of each stage of whiskey production. Install a water seal. Fermentation should take place at room temperature for 2 to 6 days. Remove the must prepared for the whiskey from the yeast precipitate and pour it into a distillation cube. The first distillation is performed as quickly as possible, without selecting the head and tail fractions. Stop the selection when the flow force falls below 30%. The remaining bard can be added to the next sledgehammer or spilled. The resulting crude alcohol, hereinafter CC, must be diluted in 25-30% alcohol and returned to the washed distillation cube. During the second distillation, select about 1 tablespoon of heads for each liter of must. Note that it is must, not raw alcohol. In addition, you can take a little bit of distillate by eye, which is called a preface in traditional Scottish distillation. This fraction, as a rule, has no flavor and it is best to add it to the next first distillation. In fact, these are heads which should occupy about 5% of the SS compartment. The fraction of the middle or heart of the race is selected in the range of 55 to 72% of alcohol in the flow to taste. The rest of the cube is finite. We select them to dry and add them to the next first stage. The distillate obtained, that is, the heart, is insisted on. Flakes of oak wood are placed in barrels of bourbon, sherry or wine. For example, Scottish distilleries often use barrels of Sauternes white wine. Basic recipe for smoked malt whiskey. Single malt whiskey is very sensitive to small changes in the recipe. For example, a small amount of smoked malt in the lightly smoked whiskey recipe forms the honey notes that are so characteristic of duct tape. A very strong influence is exerted by yeast cultures, as well as by lactobacilli. It is recommended to start with ordinary Baker and Belgian yeast for beer, but more on that later, after recipes. Irish malt whiskey with single malt. Heat half the water to 71 degrees Celsius and put the malt in it. Keeping a temperature of 66 to 68 degrees, take a break for 1 hour and 30 minutes. Strain the wort, wash the pellet twice. The first time with a quarter of water at a temperature of 73 to 74 C, the second time with a quarter of water at a temperature of 82 to 83 C. Combine the 3 plums, throw away the pellet. Cool the wort to 33 degrees Celsius, transfer to a fermenter. Add yeast and bacterial yeast. Fermentation should take place at room temperature for 2 to 3 days. Remove the must prepared for Irish whiskey from the yeast precipitate and pour into the distillation cube. The first distillation to consume up to 30% alcohol in one stream. The resulting SS, if necessary, is diluted to 25–30% and poured back into a distillation cube. Select 5% of the goals in the initial SS volume. Select the fraction of the medium in the range of 55 to 70% alcohol to taste. Tails lead to dryness, adding them to the next step. Overcome the third time, taking the head again. 1 tablespoon of each liter of puree is enough here. Collect the fraction of the medium in the region of 80 to 90% alcohol. Select the tails to dry and add to the next step. Dilute the obtained distillate to the desired strength and insist on oak chips or pour into burnt barrels of bourbon or white wine. American rye whiskey. Heat all the water to 71 degrees Celsius and add chopped grains and malt. Maintain a temperature in the range of 66 to 68 C to withstand a break for 1 hour. Then add the amylase enzyme and pause for another 30 to 45 minutes at the same temperature. Cool the wort to 33 degrees Celsius and place it with the sediment in a fermentation tank. Add yeast and yeast, send to fermentation at room temperature for 2 to 3 days. Remove the prepared must from the precipitate. If necessary, strain through a sieve or gauze and pour into a distillation cube. Make the first distillation at full speed while there is 30% alcohol in the stream. The resulting SS must be diluted to 25–30% and sent for fractional distillation. Heads are selected for 1 tablespoon for each liter of must. The average fraction to taste, in the range of 60 to 72% alcohol. Dry tails. To rest the distillate on the burnt oak wood chips about 20 seconds in a yellow flame or pour into heavily burned new oak barrels. Enjoy. Cheers.